Press TV reports that former Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman made significant statements about Iran's military capabilities during the conflict that erupted in June 2025. Speaking during an Israel Beitenu faction meeting, Lieberman reportedly acknowledged that Iranian missiles reached what he described as strategic targets in Israel during the 12-day confrontation. Press TV reported the remarks. Other outlets have not independently confirmed the full context of the quotes. Lieberman's reported statements represent a departure from the narrative that Israeli officials typically present about their military capabilities. According to Press TV, the former defense minister acknowledged that despite Israel possessing what he described as the best air force in the world, Iranian ballistic missiles demonstrated what he called their real power during the conflict. His reported assessment has drawn attention precisely because it comes from someone who served at the highest levels of Israel's security establishment. We have the best air force in the world, Lieberman reportedly said during the faction meeting, but at the same time, we saw the real power of Iranian ballistic missiles. He referenced Iran's ballistic missile arsenal, naming several missile types. According to reports of the meeting, Lieberman is quoted as saying Iran hit strategic targets, a claim we cannot independently verify in detail. The former minister was reportedly careful about operational details, noting that he did not want to go into specifics and that it was impossible to explain more at the present time. However, his general acknowledgement that Iranian missiles reached their intended targets represents a notable reported admission from a figure who has long advocated for aggressive Israeli policies toward Iran. Lieberman argued the strikes were precise and not random, according to reports of his comments. They didn't hit random places, he reportedly said. They knew exactly where to aim. Lieberman suggested they targeted specific sites. Analysts say that can indicate planning, but details are not independently confirmed. The former defense minister reportedly cited the strike on the Weizmann Institute of Science in Rehovot as an example of the damage Iran inflicted. The institute, one of Israel's leading research centers, was hit during the conflict. Reuters reported severe lab damage at Weizmann and major losses to ongoing experiments, according to available reporting on the incident. The Iranians managed to destroy the laboratory and all the accumulated research, Lieberman reportedly said. All the data and results of our work over several decades. Reuters described researchers reporting major setbacks to projects after equipment and samples were lost. The reported damage highlighted how civilian research infrastructure became a target during the conflict. Research programs in areas such as cancer treatment and cardiac regeneration reportedly suffered significant setbacks, according to available accounts. Lieberman characterized such facilities as strategic interests of the State of Israel, according to reports, acknowledging that civilian research infrastructure had become a target and that protection measures had proven insufficient. Lieberman reportedly used his remarks to issue a warning about future preparedness, arguing that Israel must begin planning now for a future Iranian attack, rather than assuming the next confrontation will resemble the previous one. The recent fighting, he said, according to reports, removed any remaining doubt about Tehran's operational reach and the need for Israel to fundamentally rethink its defensive posture. We saw what happens when preparation is incomplete, Lieberman reportedly said. We saw the cost when strategic assets are left exposed. His reported assessment suggests concerns that Israeli planners had underestimated Iran's capabilities and had failed to take adequate protective measures for critical infrastructure. The former minister reportedly argued that preparation must include advanced decisions about what needs to be protected, moved, or dispersed. We need to be smart, he reportedly said. There are strategic interests that should be evacuated, protected, and relocated in advance. Waiting until after another strike, he warned, according to reports, would only repeat the same mistakes. Lieberman reportedly cautioned against assuming continuity between past and future conflicts, warning that Iran and its regional allies are constantly adapting their capabilities and methods. The next confrontation will not look like the last one, he reportedly said, arguing that treating the previous war as a template for the next risks, leaving Israel unprepared for new tactics and technologies. This reported warning carries particular weight given his earlier acknowledgement that Israeli defenses faced significant challenges during the 12-day conflict. If Iran's capabilities exceeded Israeli expectations in June 2025, Lieberman appears to be suggesting, according to reports, that they may exceed them even further in any future confrontation as Tehran continues developing its missile arsenal. The former defense minister's reported remarks reflect what appears to be a broader reassessment within Israeli security circles about assumptions that guided military planning. Israel has long promoted its layered defenses as highly capable, but officials have never guaranteed total interception. The reported experience of the 12-day war has apparently forced reconsideration of both defensive capabilities and strategic vulnerabilities. Lieberman also reportedly rejected suggestions raised in recent days that Israel could rely on regional actors or external arrangements in confronting Iran. He dismissed proposals that would place responsibility on other countries, saying, according to reports, that Israel cannot outsource its security decisions or assume that another state will contain Tehran on its behalf. The reported rejection of external security arrangements is notable given ongoing discussions about potential regional coalitions against Iran. Lieberman's reported position suggests skepticism about the reliability of such arrangements and a belief that Israel must prepare to confront Iran independently. Politically, it can be read as skepticism about relying on allies. That is an interpretation, not a confirmed intent. This reported stance also raises questions about the limits of external support during the June conflict. While the United States reportedly joined the fighting, the damage Iran reportedly inflicted on Israeli infrastructure in the preceding days demonstrated that external support, however valuable, may not substitute for adequate defensive preparations. The conflict that Lieberman reportedly referenced began in June 2025. Israel said it struck Iran over what it described as nuclear-related concerns. Iran rejected the accusation. The strike represented what Israeli officials characterized as a response to alleged violations of previous commitments regarding nuclear activities. Reports said there were multiple rounds of talks before the conflict. Exact counts vary and are not confirmed. Before the war erupted, diplomats from the United States and Iran had reportedly held negotiations aimed at reaching an agreement on Iran's nuclear activities. During those talks, Iran had reportedly drawn a firm red line, insisting that it must be allowed to continue enriching uranium within what Tehran described as its sovereign rights under international law. The collapse of these negotiations reportedly set the stage for military action. The United States reportedly joined the conflict, deploying B-2 stealth bombers to conduct targeted airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, according to various reports. These strikes reportedly featured the use of bunker buster bombs and precision-guided missiles targeting Iranian nuclear sites. The American intervention represented a significant escalation from a regional confrontation to one involving direct superpower military action, according to reports. Iran's reported response to the combined Israeli-American assault demonstrated capabilities that some analysts say exceeded expectations. In addition to the strikes on Israeli territory that Lieberman described, some reports claim Iran targeted U.S.-linked sites in the Gulf region. We cannot independently verify the specific locations or extent of damage. The reported strikes on American-linked facilities represented Iran's apparent willingness to directly confront American military power in the region, rather than limiting its retaliation to Israeli targets. The attack sent a message that any military action against Iran would carry consequences not just for Israel, but for American forces and interests throughout the region, according to analysts. The Iranian missile activity during the 12-day conflict reportedly challenged assumptions that had guided Western military planning. The reported ability to strike defended targets in Israel while simultaneously hitting other facilities demonstrated operational reach and coordination that some analysts say had not been fully anticipated by military planners. Tensions between Tehran and Washington have continued following the June conflict, with Iranian officials issuing stark warnings about the consequences of any renewed military action. Iran's foreign minister, Sayed Abbas Araghchi, wrote in the Wall Street Journal warning Iran would fire back with everything if attacked. Unlike the restraint Iran showed in June 2025, our powerful armed forces have no qualms about firing back with everything we have if we come under renewed attack, Araghchi wrote. This isn't a threat, but a reality I feel I need to convey explicitly because as a diplomat and a veteran, I abhor war. The foreign minister's reference to restraint during the June conflict is notable. Despite the damage that Lieberman reportedly acknowledged Iran inflicted on Israeli targets, Araghchi's statement suggests that Tehran believes it held back from using its full capabilities during that confrontation. The implication that Iran could escalate further in any future conflict represents a warning that planners must factor into their calculations. Araghchi's Wall Street Journal article also challenged assumptions underlying potential Western military planning against Iran. An all-out confrontation will certainly be ferocious and drag on far, far longer than the fantasy timelines that Israel and its proxies are trying to peddle to the White House, he wrote. The characterization of quick strike scenarios as fantasy timelines suggests Iranian confidence that any conflict would become a prolonged engagement. The foreign minister warned that such a conflict would certainly engulf the wider region and have an impact on ordinary people around the globe. This warning about regional escalation reflects Iran's geographic position at the center of global energy supply routes and its relationships with allied forces across the Middle East, who could potentially open additional fronts in any expanded conflict. Araghchi's warnings must be understood in the context of Lieberman's reported admissions about Iranian capabilities. If Iranian missiles reportedly proved capable of reaching strategic targets during a conflict where Tehran claims to have shown restraint, the potential consequences of an all-out confrontation would presumably be significantly more severe. The Iranian foreign minister's article also addressed the ongoing domestic unrest within Iran and accusations of foreign involvement. Araghchi criticized public warnings regarding Iran's handling of protests, characterizing them as interference in Iran's internal affairs. In his Wall Street Journal piece, Araghchi argued that external threats were giving incentive to unrest inside Iran. The foreign minister accused both U.S. intelligence agents and Israel's Mossad operatives of being involved in coordinating some demonstrations. Araghchi alleged foreign involvement, offered no public evidence, and those claims cannot be independently verified. So they should be treated as Tehran's narrative, not established fact. The Iranian government's position on these protests has been consistent in attributing them to foreign influence. However, international human rights organizations have documented the protests as largely organic responses to domestic conditions. The competing narratives reflect the broader information environment surrounding Iran, where claims from all sides require careful verification. The diplomatic landscape has shifted notably since the June conflict, according to various reports. For several weeks before and during the war, repeated threats to launch military action against Iran had been made amid the protests. However, reports suggest the stance later softened, surprising observers who had anticipated a more aggressive posture. According to some reports, Israel may have urged Washington to hold off on additional planned military strikes against Iran, seeking more time to regroup following the damage reportedly inflicted during the 12-day conflict. If accurate, such a request would align with Lieberman's reported acknowledgement that Israeli strategic assets suffered significant damage, and that preparation for future confrontation requires substantial effort. The apparent willingness to pause military operations against Iran following the June conflict may reflect a reassessment of the costs and risks involved. The reported successful Iranian strikes on both Israeli and American-linked targets demonstrated that military action against Tehran carries consequences that cannot be easily absorbed, potentially tempering enthusiasm for additional offensive operations. Lieberman's reported admission that Iranian missiles reach their targets raises questions about Israel's defense systems. Israel has invested billions of dollars in multi-layered air defense systems, including the Iron Dome for short-range threats, David's Sling for medium-range missiles, and the Arrow system for ballistic missiles. Israel has long promoted its layered defenses as highly capable, but officials have never guaranteed total interception. The former defense minister's reported acknowledgement that these systems face significant challenges suggests that the volume of Iranian missiles may have exceeded defensive capacity, that Iranian countermeasures proved effective, or that some combination of factors allowed Iranian warheads to reach their targets. The specific explanation remains unclear from available reporting. This reported reality has implications for regional military planning and for the calculations of other nations considering responses to potential military action. If Iranian missiles can reportedly reach Israeli territory despite advanced defenses, the deterrent value of those defenses may be affected. Conversely, the reported effectiveness of Iranian missiles may enhance their deterrent value. Lieberman's reported statement that Iranian forces knew exactly where to aim deserves attention. The ability to precisely target high-value assets requires not just missile accuracy, but also detailed intelligence about the location and nature of potential targets. The reported successful strike on the Weizmann Institute suggests that Iranian forces had identified this facility and had targeting data necessary to hit it. Lieberman suggested they targeted specific sites. Analysts say that can indicate significant planning and intelligence capabilities, but details are not independently confirmed. If Iranian intelligence can identify and target a research facility, it presumably can also identify other categories of high-value targets: military installations, government facilities, and critical infrastructure. The reported precision strikes also suggest that Iranian missiles may have achieved guidance capabilities that allow them to hit specific buildings rather than simply landing within a general target area. This level of accuracy, combined with the explosive power of ballistic missile warheads, would make each missile a significant threat to whatever facility it targets. However, these assessments are based on reported accounts rather than independently verified technical analysis. Lieberman also reportedly addressed questions of accountability during his remarks, returning to calls for a state commission to investigate what he characterized as failures that left Israeli strategic assets vulnerable. He reportedly rejected any framework other than a state commission, saying that alternative approaches would avoid examining decisions taken at the highest levels. When asked about alternative models for investigation, Lieberman reportedly dismissed them outright, saying they would not address responsibility at the political and strategic level. His reported insistence on a full state commission suggests significant dissatisfaction with how Israeli leadership prepared for and managed the June conflict. The reported call for accountability reflects the magnitude of what Lieberman acknowledged occurred during the conflict. If significant research was lost, if strategic facilities were struck, and if defenses faced challenges, questions naturally arise about who made the decisions that left the country in that position and whether different choices could have produced different outcomes. The reported admissions from Lieberman and the warnings from Aragchi together raise questions about regional dynamics. For decades, Israel maintained military superiority over regional adversaries, supported by American technology, intelligence, and diplomatic backing. The assumption of Israeli military dominance shaped calculations throughout the region. The June 2025 conflict reportedly challenged this assumption in significant ways. The demonstrated ability of Iranian missiles to reportedly reach Israeli targets despite advanced defenses suggests that the cost-benefit calculation of military action against Iran may be different than previously assumed. Israeli military superiority, while still substantial, reportedly proved insufficient to prevent damage to strategic assets. This shift has implications for regional diplomacy as well as military planning. If Iran can reportedly impose significant costs on any attacker, negotiations with Tehran must account for this capability. Demands for Iranian concessions on nuclear or other issues must be weighed against the reality that military enforcement of such demands would carry costs that Lieberman has now reportedly acknowledged. The American strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities during the June conflict reportedly used some of the most powerful conventional weapons in the U.S. arsenal. B-2 stealth bombers reportedly delivered bunker buster bombs designed to penetrate deeply buried facilities, while precision-guided missiles struck additional targets. Reports indicate multiple Iranian nuclear sites were targeted during these operations. However, the full extent of damage to Iran's nuclear program remains unclear. Underground facilities, the specialized expertise of nuclear scientists, and the knowledge gained through years of research cannot all be destroyed through airstrikes alone. Iran's nuclear program has demonstrated resilience through previous periods of pressure, and there is no clear indication that the strikes permanently eliminated Iran's nuclear capabilities or knowledge base. Aragchi's warning that Iran would fire back with everything suggests that Tehran's ability to retaliate remains intact despite the strikes. The reported continued functioning of Iran's missile forces during the conflict, including successful strikes on targets in Israel and elsewhere, indicates that Iranian military capabilities survived whatever damage was inflicted. Aragchi's warning about impacts on ordinary people around the globe reflects the potential consequences of regional escalation for global energy markets and economic stability. The Persian Gulf remains one of the world's most critical energy supply routes, with millions of barrels of oil transiting daily through waterways that could become conflict zones in any expanded war. Iran's geographic position gives it potential leverage over this global choke point. Any conflict that closed or restricted passage through the Strait of Hormuz would immediately affect global oil prices and economic conditions worldwide. This reality provides Iran with a form of deterrence that extends beyond its military capabilities to encompass economic consequences that would affect populations far from the immediate conflict zone. The stakes involved in any potential future confrontation therefore extend well beyond the immediate parties. The damage that Lieberman reportedly acknowledged Iran inflicted on Israel, combined combined with the potential for strikes on energy infrastructure and shipping routes, creates risks that affect the interests of nations throughout the global economy. At its core, Lieberman's reported message focused on the question of preparation versus reaction. The issue, in his reported view, is not whether Israel can respond after an attack, but whether it is willing to take preventive steps before one. His reported argument that strategic assets should be evacuated, protected, and relocated in advance reflects recognition that defensive measures taken after strikes begin may be insufficient. "We cannot ask afterward why we didn't do this earlier," Lieberman reportedly said. His statement implies that Israeli leadership had opportunities to better protect vulnerable facilities before the June conflict, but failed to act on them. The damage to the Weizmann Institute and other targets might have been prevented, he suggested, according to reports, if advanced preparations had been more thorough. This reported critique carries political implications for those who held power during the period leading up to the conflict. By highlighting preparation failures, Lieberman appears to be assigning responsibility to decision makers who did not adequately protect Israeli strategic interests, despite having the ability and opportunity to do so. The combination of Lieberman's reported admissions and Araghchi's warnings requires consideration of deterrence dynamics throughout the region. Deterrence functions when potential attackers believe that the costs of military action will exceed any benefits they might achieve. The reported Iranian capability to inflict significant damage on Israeli strategic assets affects this calculation for any party considering military action against Tehran. Before the June conflict, some analysts argued that Iranian missile capabilities were largely symbolic, useful for political messaging but unlikely to achieve meaningful military effects against well-defended Israeli targets. Lieberman's reported acknowledgement that Iranian missiles showed their real power and successfully reached strategic sites challenges this assessment directly. The foreign minister's warning that future Iranian retaliation would involve everything available further affects deterrence calculations. If June 2025 represented restrained Iranian response, as Araghchi suggested, then any future conflict could involve capabilities and intensity that were deliberately held back during that confrontation. Potential attackers must factor this possibility into their planning. The tensions that reportedly produced the June 2025 conflict have not been resolved. The underlying disputes about Iran's nuclear program, regional influence, and relationships with armed groups throughout the Middle East remain contentious. The protests within Iran and accusations of foreign involvement add another dimension of instability to an already volatile situation. Lieberman's reported call for immediate preparations for future Iranian attack reflects an expectation that the June conflict may not have been the final military confrontation between Iran and Israel. The strategic competition between them continues, and the demonstrated willingness of both sides to use military force suggests that future conflicts remain possible, despite the cost both sides reportedly incurred. The international community faces the challenge of managing these tensions in ways that prevent escalation while addressing the concerns of all parties. The damage reportedly inflicted during the June conflict to Israeli research facilities, to Iranian nuclear installations, to regional stability, demonstrates the costs of military confrontation. Whether those costs will deter future conflict or simply raise the stakes for the next round remains to be seen. The region and the world continue to watch as tensions between Iran, Israel, and the United States remain elevated. Lieberman's reported admission that Iranian missiles reached Israeli defenses has entered public discussion, raising questions about assumptions of Israeli invulnerability that had shaped regional perceptions. Araghchi's warnings about Iranian readiness to retaliate with everything available add to concerns about potential escalation. For now, the situation remains tense. Diplomatic channels remain open, and both sides have incentives to avoid another round of conflict that could prove even more costly. However, the underlying disputes remain unresolved, and the capabilities that both sides reportedly demonstrated remain available for potential future use.